Our next question is question number 1. Roberts Bank is the most important bird area in Canada and top 10 in the world. How will you ensure that Roberts Bank is protected from Port Metro's plans to add a second terminal?
Thank you. I touched on this a little bit in the answer to the previous question. With a credible review process, I mean, we know that the biofilm that the birds eat on Roberts Bank is a very important part of the ecosystem there. We know that it is, as has been mentioned, a critical piece of the migratory path for migrating birds. It also protects the estuary is also incredibly important for our fisheries on the west coast. We would protect it by making sure that we have a process in place that adequately assesses the kinds of damage that would be done to our ecosystem, to our community, to these delicate spaces by any project that were to go ahead. Now, from everything I've read, the business case for Roberts Bank, the expansion of Terminal 2, doesn't hold water. So there's one red flag there to start with in any sort of environmental review process. Is the project worth the ecological damage? Economically, is it worth the ecological damage that it would do? And Roberts Bank fails on test 1. As for all of the other environmental impacts and health impacts that would have to be accounted for, that's the kind of thing we would do within our review process. We would seek community consultation. We would want to make sure that any project that goes ahead has community buy-in, which again is not something that Terminal 2 has. And we would ensure that any project that goes ahead is safe for the environment and the community. And any project, this would be one standard. The government shouldn't be in the business of promoting or denying projects. One standard applies to everybody. If you can't pass the test, you don't get the permit, the project doesn't go forward. Full stop.
Thank you. I'd just like to mention that it was in fact a Liberal government under Environmental Minister David Anderson that championed the bog and brought Delta $29 million on behalf of the federal government in the early 2000s. Terminal 2 raises so many flags, it's hard to know where to begin. First of all, there is not a compelling business case for this initiative. I have been convinced, and I remain to be convinced otherwise, that our needs with respect to port cannot be served with existing infrastructure and perhaps some upgrades. On the environmental side of it, it is a disaster waiting to happen. We need a robust environmental assessment process in Canada that wouldn't even let this kind of discussion start happening. Under a Liberal government, you will have that process that will look at the cumulative effects of all these different things. That's not happening now. What happens when we get T2 and the LNG and the coal and all this other stuff happens in our community? No one looks at the cumulative environmental impact. So we need a robust EA process. Thank you.
Well, what I hear here is a lot of people making up their minds before processes have begun. And I agree with them all that a rigorous environmental process has to be undertaken. And that is why we have such a process in place. Now, we have both a federal environmental assessment process and a provincial environmental assessment process. I'm not speaking on behalf of the province today, but most people recognize the federal environmental regulatory process is stiffer, more strident than the provincial one. So when we merge those processes, when we say, okay, provincial government, you can take the lead on this, we make sure they have to meet the higher standards of the federal process. And there is a fairness factor when any project goes forward of letting the proponents, the investors know within a certain timeline whether that's going to go ahead or not. And as you know, this Conservative government has both turned down projects that needed an environmental assessment and approved them. But the ones we've approved have often been with a huge number of conditions. Unless the proponents meet those conditions, those are not going ahead. Whether it's T2 or any other project, they have to prove that there are not negative effects on the environment, or they can mitigate them to a standard that would be acceptable to the community. There has to be First Nations consultation, which is very important. And here, anything to do with the Fraser River Estuary doesn't just involve consultation with TFN, but Musqueam and other First Nations as well. These are rigorous processes, and we stand behind those independent evaluations.
It's nice to hear we're all in agreement that the Delta Port expansion is a bad idea. Bill C-38, some of you might remember that over 70 environmental regulations got destroyed by Bill C-38, an omnibus bill, and that was actually that was the moment I decided I was going to get into politics. The Green Party uses scientists and evidence-based decision-making. And right now, the evidence and the science doesn't support the Roberts Bank expansion, and the business case isn't there either. So why it's even still a subject for conversation, since it's been proposed since the late 60s, is a hard question to answer. But what you need here in Delta is a member of Parliament who's empowered to actually fight. Bay Street. What you have is Ottawa leaders who are beholden to Bay Street and Wall Street, and they need... So even though we're all here in Delta in agreement that we don't want the Delta Port expansion, Ottawa wants it because Bay Street wants it, because Wall Street wants it. So if you want to fight the Delta Port expansion, the only real choice to have an independent and empowered member of Parliament to vote against it is to vote Green.